What a distinguished guest this morning, the Lord Mayor of London, Fiona Woolf. She's visiting 4 African countries in our Cape Town studio now. Good morning to you, Lord Mayor. We have to call you Lord Mayor because, as we know, there is a Mayor of London who is Boris Johnson. He's a Conservative Party leader. And you are the Lord Mayor, and it's the City of London that you are the Mayor of. And perhaps it'll be a bit cumbersome to call you Lord Mayor throughout the programme. So if I may call you Fiona, if we could call you Fiona from now on. But you do have a unique position, don't you? It's non-party partisan, party political. You have this unique situation in the global, constitutionally, if you like, in Britain, but also in the global financial services market.
Yes, that's right. The Lord Mayor of the City of London is in fact an ambassador for the whole of the UK-based services sector, but obviously based in the city means that you're going to focus on financial and professional business services.
Well, with me in Johannesburg is Kobie Legrandje. He's our market commentator for this morning. Kobie?
Yeah, I think one of the things is if we look at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it actually has a very strong affiliation with the London Exchange, and that has been garnered over the years. Fiona, maybe just a question, from my perspective. One of the things that we see on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is the classification system that we utilize for companies here in South Africa. We utilize the FTSE system, which obviously is based on the London Exchange. We obviously have many companies here in South Africa which are listed in London. What's the future of that look like? What do you think needs to happen in order to ensure that the JSE and the London Stock Exchange can work more closely together?
Well, I think that they probably know well that the whole area of technology in stock exchanges is a big part of their businesses, and I'm amazed at how much investment the London Stock Exchange in particular makes in technology. It's the ideas that they have for not just the sort of classic dual listing, but other very fast platforms. Well, they're amazing.
Fiona, your purpose of being, well, the 4 African countries we can talk about, but let's just start with South Africa. You see opportunities, particularly the capacity, expertise, finance that the City of London can bring to bear on our infrastructure program, and boy, do we need it. We've been talking about it for so long, but it's not happening.
Yes, that's right. Infrastructure is exactly the area of that everybody talks to us about, because they're looking at new techniques for long-term finance for infrastructure. You know, the old idea that you had sort of, long-term bank debt just doesn't really work. It's not sustainable under, Basel 1, 2 and 3. So what we're seeing is a lot of collaboration and discussion in the City of London with new models, new types of capital markets products, new hybrid funds, new derivatives, debt market instruments, bond issues, Islamic finance, all coming together in an effort to meet the enormous volume of demand for infrastructure financing. Fiona,
many South African corporations, have got some bases in London and obviously, across the United Kingdom. One of the things that I hear them talking about when they come back to South Africa is the actual cost of doing business in London and just the cost of general living in London, which apparently has gone up insurmountable relative to South African standards. Pretty difficult for a South African business to kind of enter the London market and to be able to do business there. What are you doing as a city in order to try and enhance this kind of inflow from emerging markets?
Well, what I say to most companies that are looking to establish themselves in London is we have lots of very competitive cities in the UK which offer the talent and the office accommodation at more affordable levels. So many foreign companies and businesses and banks have got perhaps a head office in the city, but outsource their operations. And indeed, we're seeing some of the American banks putting more front office operations out, whether, to not just the Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, whatever, but JP Morgan down to Bournemouth, to Dorset. They're one of the biggest regional employers.
Yep. Fiona, there are a couple of other issues from the South African perspective that we would like to raise, but we can do that in a moment. And let's move now to Kenya, where our market commentator this morning, Ali Khan Sachu, is waiting for us. Of course, you've arrived in South Africa. You're still to get to Kenya, also Uganda, Tanzania. But Ali Khan, what will you be expecting and be interested in from the Lord Mayor?
We look forward to saying Karibu, which is welcome in Swahili, to the Lord Mayor. I think it's as early as tomorrow. When she visits here in Nairobi. And the point I would like to make, in being a sort of Kenyan, British sort of a person, having worked in the city for many years, here in Kenya we have very, very deep and abiding ties. About half the value of the stock market is held by UK PLC companies. The ties that bind us have been long-term, historical, and are very, very deep. And coming back to the Lord Mayor, clearly with the focus on the City of London, there's been a big collaboration with the stock exchange, which, by the way, the IPO starts trading tomorrow. My question to the Lord Mayor, Fiona Woolf, is, how is she seeking, what areas is she seeking to build when she comes to East Africa? Obviously, we've had this big expansion in the oil and gas sector. There seem to be lots of opportunities. But what is the focus for the Lord Mayor when she lands in Nairobi?
Well, I think the two obvious things, one I've already mentioned, which is infrastructure financing. Every country is challenged by both infrastructure and energy, and there's lots of things we can do together, building on those historical links that you mentioned. But also, I'm keen to engage with the Capital Markets Authority. We've been talking about the development of capital markets in Kenya and in East Africa generally. It's important that these markets develop because of the constraints that I've mentioned under Basel. We can't turn to banks for every sort of financing, and it's long-term finance, which I think is the challenge for us all. Not just long-term finance for infrastructure, but actually, long-term savings products. Did you know? I mean, in Europe, 57% of us keep our long-term savings in short-term deposit accounts, which can't be right.
I don't know if you have another comment in response to that. What interests me also is that Fiona Woolf is a lawyer, and I think your speciality was energy law, and I'm using that as a way of getting into asking you, on the one hand, there's a lot of interest in infrastructure development and growth in Africa. On the other hand, there are a lot of obstacles, regulatory and bureaucratic. You must have had some dealings with that, and are you able to help cut through these things?
We can do, I think, two things. One is to continue to bang the drum for stable and predictable policy environments and tax regimes, visa regimes, everything that makes business easy to do. And then it's a question of gathering up the nuts and bolts of the irritations of investors, whether it's just bureaucratic delays or lack of clarity, and to feed in a list of those things that would actually make the environment more attractive. I mean, the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index is a good starting point. But nevertheless, it's sort of feeding in the practical difficulties, and oftentimes they are just kind of inadvertent things that are just a bit slow, where we can help to point out. But all countries are struggling with this.
Ali Khan, you had another point?
If I can, yes, if I can just come back to the Lord Mayor and her experience in the energy sector and the legal side. Obviously, we're sitting on a very exciting moment here in the oil and gas sector. The likes of BG, PLC in Tanzania, Tullow Oil here in Kenya have been at the forefront of discovering the oil and gas in this region. How is the Lord Mayor approaching these different jurisdictions, Tanzania, Kenya, a lot of volatility around policy making, and there is clearly a lack of certainty in many areas, the desire for some countries to raise revenue via windfall taxes. What is the message the Lord Mayor is delivering to leadership in Kenya and East Africa?
Well, I think the message is that there is so much experience around the world that actually is collected through the City of London that we can let these countries know what's worked and what hasn't worked in other countries, what deters investment. After all, they're anxious to capture the benefits of the natural resources that they have. And we've been at it for 75, 80 years or so, and we can give them lots of lessons learned. I mean, one of the unique things about the city and the UK in general is that it's actually quite a small domestic market, and it's attracted a lot of international players. And we've become sort of the collectors and implementers of best practice all over the world, because the city becomes a trampoline. And so, very happy to help people understand what works and what doesn't.
Well, obviously there'll be lots of interest in East Africa when you get there, Fiona. Ali Khan leaves our discussion now, so we've done the East African component. Thanks, Ali Khan, for the questions. Well, we continue our conversation with the Lord Mayor of London, Fiona Woolf. You might think, why do we keep saying the Lord Mayor? Well, there are two mayors of London. The Lord Mayor is at the City of London, which is a very small but very important part of London. Of course, London as a great metropolis has a different mayor altogether. Fiona, you joined us earlier, and what struck me also is the influence of the City of London, the expertise, the market influence capacity that it has. Now, there's an issue which I think a lot of people didn't take too seriously, but is suddenly taking very seriously, and that's the proposed independence move by Scotland. The First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, has been pushing this very hard. Now, in recent days, apparently, the opinion polls are saying that this could go the way of the yes vote. In other words, Scotland leaves the United Kingdom after 300-odd years. And people are asking questions. What will happen to the pound? What will happen to investment? What will happen to the city, in fact? So what is the conversation in the city about this? You must have kept a very close eye on this.
Well, yes, it is very much a concern of the City of London because of the strong financial services sector that you find in Scotland, and particularly in Edinburgh, where they're famous for insurance and asset management, but they have a full range of services as well. And if there is a yes vote for independence, then a huge number of details would need to be sorted out, of which the pound and the EU membership would be just a couple. We've talked about how financial services would be regulated in Scotland because of the huge connectivity between Edinburgh and London. They're very interlinked. Essentially, I mean, my concern is the amount of time that it would take to work everything out, and the devil, as I'm a lawyer, let me tell you, always lies in the detail. So the time it would take to pass the legislation, the regulations, give effect to them, develop the systems and software to implement. I mean, this is across all sectors, not just financial services. And I suppose the worry for everybody north and south of the border is whether during this period it would have a chilling effect on trade and investment from outside.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that the first pension fund was invented by the Presbyterian Church in Scotland in the 1700s, I think. they did what would now be called an actuarial calculation and created the first pension fund for their ministers. But Kobe, you have a question for Fiona.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if one looks at the City of London, it has become, and so it has been since I think the 60s and the 1950s, a very, very important source of capital for global businesses and for, you know, even American businesses trying to create a foothold in the European market and in the British market, and then potentially to jump from there into the African market. Given Scottish independence, given what is happening in the Eurozone with tighter rules and so on, what is the City of London doing, especially in the next 12 months, in order to ensure that they continue to be a city that can be important for companies to raise capital and to be important on a capital scale?
Well, as you might imagine, we're very actively engaged in the European debate for the reasons you've articulated, because you know, the vast majority of city businesses value being in the EU and the proximity, being part of the single market. We have we have an office in Brussels, obviously, that keeps close to developments and is part of the development of the regulations that come from there. But we've also established dialogues with our counterparts in a number of European countries in order to build a consensus, and it's not really very difficult to achieve that consensus, because actually we'd all like the new European Commission to focus on the growth and jobs agenda, and particularly I think on a passion of mine, which is long-term finance.
Well, Fiona, our Nigerian colleague Wole Famarewa joins the conversation now. Wole, we know that the Lord Mayor isn't coming to the west of Africa this time, is going to the east, but if she was coming and you sat down with her, what would you want to know? Because you're not with her, but as you say, you are virtually with her.
Yeah, good morning, David. Well, of course, we do know that the previous Lord Mayor did visit Nigeria not too long ago. But my question to the Lord Mayor, good morning to you. My question would be to get your thoughts on the strategic links between Nigeria and, of course, London, the City of London. I do recall that when the last Lord Mayor was in Nigeria, he did mention that as many as 1 million Nigerians live in the city of Lagos. So clearly there are very historical links between the two countries. Your thoughts about, from a business perspective, strategically, what would you like to see between the City of London and Nigeria?
Well, of course, there are strong ties already, as you know, and you did say the Lord Mayor had visited before. I'm sorry that I can't do everything, because I have a soft spot for West Africa, having worked in several countries there. But between apart from the energy sector, which has always been in the center of the radar screen, again, there's lots of opportunity in the financial and professional services area. Actually, you have a very good legal profession. I have many contacts with them, but there's partnering on, again, capital markets, and looking at public-private partnerships, on which the UK has, of course, an enormously deep and long experience, but again has been the collector and implementer of best practice from all over the world. But really, you know, for a made in Nigeria solution.
Wole, you have another question?
Right. I think an interesting point would be maybe developing even the trade links between the two cities, because like I mentioned, if 1 million Nigerians live in London right now, then clearly there's an appetite for a lot of Nigerian-made products. So your thoughts about the potential for Nigerian companies to begin to export goods to the UK, given the strong Nigerian population in London?
Yes, indeed. But I think that the market in London, sorry, the market in the UK imports a great deal from the African continent. In fact, I think they import more than they export. And happily, of course, we are experiencing something between 3.5–4% growth. So you're not looking at the situation that we have in some of the European countries where growth has slowed so much. So that the opportunities for imports from Nigeria, I think, can only grow.
Fiona, just coming back to us in Johannesburg for a moment, the other story in the news at the moment is the European Union trying to cap the bonuses that are awarded to executives in the financial services sector. I think it's 100% bonus is the cap, under special circumstances 200%, and that of course would seriously undermine the City of London and that square mile, as they call it, of expertise and investment influence, seriously undermine that. What have you been doing to try and stop this happening?
This issue has been with us for quite a while, and it is not an easy one, because the businesses and banks in the city will tell you that they are only as good as their talent pool. We do know from a survey, I think, that Deloitte carried out, that we have the largest number of highly qualified individuals. New York is second, and I think Los Angeles third. So they're fishing in a global pool, and the global pool is very much very mobile. So there are, I think that we've seen a slowing of bonuses. The bonus levels in the UK are perhaps a bit lower, and they're certainly much more long-term. There is an argument that performance-related remuneration works better than fixed salaries. But of course, recently the businesses have been criticised for reforming a bonus into something called an allowance. There are obviously different ways of remunerating people, but the cap, the 100% and the 200% with the consent of the shareholders, is something that actually appeared rather quickly, and it's an area where the European processes, I think, need looking at. It's one of our concerns about the EU.
Well, the Lord Mayor of London, Fiona Woolf, is on a trip to South Africa. She's going up to East Africa as well. Thanks to her for joining us this morning on Open Exchange, and to our market commentator this morning, Kobi Lekranji from Clucas Gray.